Okay, we're going to get started. So let's welcome everybody to the City Council Oversight Committee meeting of Thursday, December 14th, 2023. We have 3 items on our agenda this evening. And I'll just remind everybody that since we have Planning Commission later this evening, we have a hard stop at 6 tonight. So we have 2 hours to get through these things, but there might be a lot of questions on multiple of them. So we'll get started off with item number 1, which is a discussion regarding the review of the home base plan. I will recognize Heidi. And
hello.
Hello.
I have some copies of the home base study I'm happy to pass out. This can also be found
We can just pass them around.
on the city website and the COC website. If you would like a copy of
You
it.
have one. You have one.
That's just the,
Yeah, this is old.
This is the copy of the strategic plan of the home base study. If you would like to see the full study, it is on the website. So the study itself was finished about 2 years ago, and it was commissioned by the city in order to talk about what the plan with Cleveland County, specifically the city of Norman, to help with those who are experiencing homelessness. So they came back with several recommendations, and I would like to give you an update on those recommendations. Lisa was kind enough to print them out for us. So if you will go to page 15. I'm happy to just quickly run through each of them if you want, and if we have questions, you can stop me or we can wait, however you guys want to do that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's go through them and then I'll
Okay.
interject if we've got questions on specific items.
I'm going to get my notes out so that I don't miss anything. So goal 1 is secure a housing future for all Norman residents. The short-term goal 1.2 is conduct a housing market analysis and affordability strategy for the county and the cities of Moore and Noble. That is underway. With the Norman Housing Authority and the COC are working on that. Medium term 1.2. Let's see. No, I'm sorry. I did that wrong. I'm looking at 2 different things. So the update is on the 1.2, develop a moving on policy. We are still working on the market analysis and affordability strategy. That's something that will probably happen in the next year.
it should be done by probably about May.
May. So that's something the city is working on. It should be done in May. So the next step, 1.2, protect and expand affordable housing through local policy, developing a move-on policy or move-on strategies. Basically what that says is especially supportive housing, permanent supportive housing has more case management with it. And the goal is that people are not staying in permanent supportive housing for several years, if possible, that they're moving on to other strategies that will help them that may not have the case management piece with it, to free up those case management hours for the next person who would need it. So the COC is working on that strategy. That's part of, the COC has developed some more metrics and things to help and find out where we are, especially with our NOFO funding. NOFO is the Notice of Funding Opportunity. That's the money HUD gives to the COC that allows us to house several members of our community. So in those documents and with the Norman Housing Authority, there now is in the case management notes and the management notes for those people, like what is the strategy to help them move on to the next things? What is the strategy to help them increase income? What is the strategy to help them with therapies or mental health or substance abuse to get them? That's part of the Housing First philosophy, is we don't ask people to do things before we get them housed, but part of housing them stably is once they are housed, then we're providing case management and tools and strategies and resources. So part of Move On is saying, okay, you've been in permanent supportive housing. I'll just use Thunderbird Clubhouse as the example most of the time because that's where I work. So we have several people that are on a permanent supportive housing plan that have maybe been on for 3 or 4 years. So the question is, okay, it's been 3 years. Can we move you on to just a regular Section 8 voucher so that we're freeing up those case management hours for somebody else? And HUD says we can't tell them they have to move on. We just have to encourage them to move on. So then the question is like, what's your barrier to going on to Section 8? Are you just not as comfortable with the way you would have to pay your rent? How can we help you to become comfortable with that? What can we provide you? What resource can we provide you? What strategy can we provide you that makes that something that you are willing and able to do? Because we want to free up that one. We house 8 to 10 people a year, and it's a continual support. It's a continual rent support. So we want to be able to open that up to 1 or 2 or 3 people a year, but in order to do that, somebody has to move on from the grant.
Heidi, how does that work? And you can speak to how it works at Thunderbird. When we have wait times for receiving Section 8 vouchers, and then wait times to get into a place that accepts Section 8. So how do you work through that?
Permanent supportive
with your
housing
members?
specifically is people who do not qualify usually for a Section 8 voucher. For whatever reason, they may owe money to the Norman Housing Authority. They may owe money to another housing authority. They may be a felon. For some reason, they are not able to get on a Section 8 voucher. They may have been removed from the Section 8 program, and once that happens, you have a 3-year wait before you qualify again. So PSH, permanent supportive housing, specifically is for those who don't have a Section 8 voucher. For those who have received a voucher, who have found a unit but not yet gotten a voucher, but they qualify, there's tenant-based rental assistance, TBRA, that's bridge funding to get them until their Section 8 voucher kicks in. And that has different funding sources. Keep in mind with everything I'm saying, all the funding sources have changed in the last 3 months. There were huge amounts of COVID money that was coming in to help with housing, like several $100,000s a year, and all of that stopped in September. So July and September, those grants were done. There's no more of that funding coming. We are reverting to pre-COVID levels. I will tell you that looks like Clubhouse going from administering between $350,000 and $450,000 a year to $150,000 a year. That's $300,000 a year of direct housing benefit that is not coming into our community that had been for the previous 2 years. So resources have become very, very slim on the ground. Very slim.
And thank you for, I guess, giving us kind of a breakdown of like where this funding is coming from, how many, how people may qualify for different things and not others, and the complexity of how people can move this term moving on and getting them into
Right.
Situations where they can thrive themselves without some of the extra permanent supportive housing
Right.
or things like that. So I think the nuance in all of that is really complicated.
Right. And quite honestly, Section 8 vouchers, most people are not going to move on from a Section 8 voucher. And most of these people are probably on disability. They're probably on a fixed income. There's going to be a small percentage that of people that they just need the handout. They just need a one-time support, or they just need 6 months of support. Maybe a younger person with children who is pursuing a further education, and Section 8 is a bridge until they increase their income. A lot of the people on Section 8, they're going to be on Section 8 until they no longer need housing support. So as far as the move on, some of that is from moving from emergency housing vouchers, which were available during COVID. Once those expend, then they would need to move on to a regular mainstream or Section 8 voucher. So some of that is moving between programs. But the biggest part of that is moving from permanent supportive housing into Section 8 or a mainstream voucher.
So when you're looking at developing kind of policies for Move On, this is so that any agency that's working within the COC can also utilize these types of policies as they're working with the people that are engaging with their services, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And as I said, HUD says, we want you to move on, but you can't make anybody move on. So if somebody wants to stay on the Clubhouse Permanent Supportive Housing Grant for 15 years, they can do that. But that's just continuing the conversation of stabilized housing of, okay, so what's that barrier? What can we do to help you move that way? And if it takes us having that same conversation for 3 years and then they decide to do that, then that's just how the system
Yeah. And
functions.
so it seems to me like with this particular piece that it's really important to have that case management
Yes.
side of the work, because that's how you're getting those conversations and you're starting to talk about what are the barriers and helping people move through structures. Councilmember Green.
What kinds of behavioral health issues kind of, like, is it CPTSD? Like, what makes it hard for somebody to get to that move on level? We talking schizophrenia?
It can be anything. I mean, it could be major depression. It could be anxiety. It can be anything. Like I'll just speak from what I know. We have a member at Clubhouse that she has anxiety and depression, and she is used to the system of she brings her rent to Clubhouse and pays that, and then she brings her portion to us, and then we write the full check. And the idea of having to change that system, which she is familiar with and is part of the way her world operates, causes extreme anxiety to her. So that's somebody that I personally, as somebody in accounting, thinks, well, just move on. Just come on. You can do this. It ain't hard. It's not hard for me, but it may be very, very difficult for her. She's used to this system. This is something it's a system, it's a coping strategy she's put in place that allows her to function with her mental illness the way it is. So it's what supports can we provide you to, do we need to go with you the first time you need to pay your rent there? Do we need to go with you the first 6 times you do that? Do we need to go with you every time you do that until it's integrated into the way that she's able to cope and to work?
And then for those who move on, are there outcomes, like where they are at a year, 2 years, 3 years out?
Well, if they move on to a Section 8 voucher, then it would just be a function of how long have they been on the Section 8 voucher.
Okay.
I will be very, very transparent and very honest. Data and outcomes are incredibly difficult to come by because everybody's working in a different system unless you're working very specifically in grants that are funded by HUD. And then you have to enter into HMIS. But if you are running any kind of program that isn't funded directly by HUD and requires HMIS entry, you don't have to keep statistics. You don't have to keep data. You don't have to tell us anything. So, and to aggregate, that is more than we have the capability of doing in our community. You would have to have somebody in our community who that's all they do is data. And then I don't even think that would work, because then how do you tell an overburdened case manager, I'm gonna need you to enter one more place. I'm gonna need you to add one more thing. I'm gonna need you to learn one more system.
So there's like no admin function for the COC? It's just like whoever sends people to participate, right?
Correct. It is all the COC is voluntary, except for people who receive specific HUD, ESG, and permanent supportive housing funding. Any other entry, and those are the only people that enter in HMIS. We have had people who have received funding before and had a period of time where they entered in HMIS, but once they are no longer receiving funding for that, not only are you asking them to add one more step, but it's $500 a user per year. So you're asking them to take money from programs and funding that I can't reimburse to them to do something that just complicates an already complicated and overburdened system.
Okay, thank you.
And I will be real honest, I'm going to advocate for case managers and making their lives as simple as possible every single chance I can get. Because these people are doing God's work with their hands tied behind their backs from a resource standpoint. And they're dealing with some people with very high barriers that are some very difficult people in the world for whatever reason that is their world. But we don't have enough case management anywhere. Okay, I will get off that soapbox. The 1.2 medium term, adopt policies at the municipal and county level. I'm not going to read through all this unless you really want to. The strategic housing plan that is part of AIM Norman, which is an initiative that the city is participating in.
Yeah, and just I guess to give people an understanding, through our comprehensive land use plan, we're doing lots of different updates to studies related to streets and traffic, stormwater. We're also doing this housing study, so these will be subcommittees of kind of our larger committee, and they'll be working on that through the next year or so. So just to kind of give an understanding of, like, there are multiple things here that say that they're kind of under AIM Norman, and so
Right.
that is the structure that is happening with.
Strategy 1.3, develop greater access to affordable housing through a coordinated landlord engagement campaign. That is underway. We used ARPA funding to locate a housing navigator at Norman Housing Authority. He is an employee of Norman Housing Authority, but his salary is compensated from money that flows from the city. His goal, and that's also CDBG Cares funding that is paying for that. His goal is not to find a house for people who are homeless, though that's what housing navigators do in most cities. Our housing navigator goes out and meets with landlords and asks them to participate in the Section 8 program. Because it doesn't matter how many vouchers you have, if landlords are not willing to rent to people that use a Section 8 voucher, it doesn't do us any good. So his whole job for the last 18 to 24 months has been out meeting with landlords that, said, you don't take Section 8. Here are the benefits of Section 8. You're going to get your money every month. It's going to be direct deposited to you. There are not special rules for these people. So he's going to give the whole spiel, and you're going to say, I'm not interested. Well, he's going to come back in a month and say, have you thought about it? What about 2 units? Would you do 2 Section 8 units and just see how that works? And we've gone to an increase in the number of properties and landlords who are willing to take Section 8 vouchers. And they're able to ask more and more units that will be available to Section 8.
Councilmember Grant?
Is there training for landlords? I had spoken to one who did do Section 8 that had some damages and pulled out, and then got to talk to Karen Canavan about how landlords could benefit from like a checklist, if you will. Like, did you visit this property? Are you keeping in contact? Or are you coming by every so often to make sure things are all right?
That's one of the things that the Housing Navigator is doing. We've also been working, when I say we, I have on my to-do list a landlord luncheon, which we do those events every so often. I've been trying to get one on a schedule for about 8 months now. I'm one day going to dig out enough that that's going to hit the top of the list. That is not until after the pit count at this point in January. But yes, that is resources that are provided, and we do occasional landlord lunches or landlord events where we tell them what the benefits are.
Councilmember Montoya?
So what has been the feedback that what was the term you used?
Housing Navigator?
Yeah, the Housing Navigator. So what has been the feedback that they have been getting from landlords on whether or not they will or won't and why they don't? And then how successful has this individual been? Has there been an increase in landlords?
There
who are
has.
willing to
I don't know what the
participate?
exact numbers are. I would have to ask Karen to provide those, which I'm happy to do.
Yeah, we receive a report each month of his activities, and what we are seeing is that there's been a huge turnover of ownership and management in a lot of the multifamily developments here. And we are beginning to see that, such and such complex, they would have kind of an internal rule that they would only do 5 Section 8 units. And so he has been able to go and meet with these new managers and ask, are you having any problems? What are your issues? And they're like, well, no, everything's fine. And they say, well, would you be willing to do 8 or 10? And they go, yeah. And so it's been pretty busy just trying to meet all the new players in town. He's been here about 18 months now, and each month there's 5 or 6 new units that are available that he's been able to outreach to landlords about.
Councilmember Ball?
How many Section 8 units are available right now?
I
In the
think
city.
that they have about 1,200 vouchers.
Sounds right.
That fluctuates depending on income and lots of other things. They're authorized for X amount, a number of them,
Right,
but
based
they
on-
can only spend X amount of dollars. And so each month it's a balancing thing. I can tell you that right now, the waiting list, they are leasing, like last February. People that signed up last February
Are just-
are getting intakes.
So almost a year.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's.
Is that for
to a year
seniors too?
before-
'Cause-
When you get on the list till your
Right.
voucher comes
Ask
up.
that one more time.
Is that for seniors as well, or just, because I know there's a
Yeah,
separate.
that's
okay.
for all populations.
Okay.
The only, if an applicant has a documented disability and they are under 62,
Okay.
there are the Section 811 mainstream vouchers that are available, which kind of bumps them to the top
Okay,
of the list.
so right now we're looking
Yeah.
almost,
So-
not quite a year, 8 months, 10 months?
Before the
So-
pandemic, it was 2.5 to 3 years.
Right, so
During the
that's-
pandemic, it got to a point where it was 30 days.
How many units do we have currently? Just actually accepting the Section 8 vouchers?
I'm not for sure.
Not
We
for
can
sure?
find that out.
Okay.
That is a Karen Canavan question from
Okay.
the Housing Authority.
Perfect. So, I just want to see how much work he had cut out for him. So, are there benefits that from like the federal or state level, like insurance for people who accept Section 8? Or what tools does he have to encourage people to participate? And you can answer that later, or he can talk to me later, because I'd be interested in talking to him to see what challenges
Basically,
he's.
he just, there's a lot of myths about the Section 8 program. You have, as a landlord, you have the same rights and responsibilities as renting a unit in the private sector.
Okay.
If you have a tenant that damaged your property, then you have the same recourse with that tenant that happened. It's the same responsibility that the landlord has to maintain the property
Right.
and, check in on it and everything like that. The fair housing laws still
Right.
apply. The only difference is that as part of the Section 8 application process is they do a criminal check. And
Right.
if you have a violent.
And I understand why some people feel that
you're
way.
not
I mean,
eligible, but
a higher risk if something does happen because of the person's
You know,
income.
it happens
So, I mean, I would
everywhere.
love to see like some state or federal programs that would step up to help insure renters who participated in this program. I think that would help a lot.
And
But-
there's an inspection involved,
Yeah.
but it's not overly burdensome.
Right.
Basically, if you can't pass the HQS inspection, you shouldn't rent the apartment
Right.
to anybody.
Right. Okay.
But
But I-
there's a lot of myths along that within the property management segment, and he is just working through those with the different entities.
So one thing to get to, I think your question too, is one of the long-term goals for 1.3 is establishing a landlord risk mitigation fund. So if the city was to set aside funds that a landlord that had any issues with property damage or whatever because they were, leasing to someone that has a Section 8 voucher. And I know we've talked about it, and that's something that I'm personally very supportive of, the city putting funds kind of aside to do that. And I think that gets to some of that issue. Like, it could be a benefit to say, hey, if I accept Section 8 and something happens, I can recoup
Absolutely.
my costs. So I know that we don't have anything that's underway right now, but I mean, that is something
That could help.
that I'd like to talk about in the next budget cycle, that we're putting aside that money for that specific purpose. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, strategy 1.4, expand housing through the coordinated assistance program. 1.4A, expand the highly successful coordinated efforts to assist people experiencing homelessness to obtain identification documents. That was something that, was it Cleveland County and the Normandy Police Department? There were several agencies before COVID that had done several of those fairs at Andrews Park where you could actually come and they would help you get identification, a birth certificate, and everything like that. We're hoping to start that again. We have a resource fair scheduled for January. It will be at the Well the weekend before the pit count, which is January 25th. So it's like 19th or 20th, somewhere in that. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact date. But those are COC members who are working to do those, and they hope to make that something that's happening quarterly. Fingers crossed. But we'll see how the first one goes and then go from there on that. 1.4C, expand rental assistance programs to cover application fees. That is underway, utilizing CDBG CARES funds. And then 1.4D, developed a shared housing program that increased the housing available to single adults through 2- and 3-bedroom homes. That is shared housing. That is a program that Norman Housing Authority has. It's really difficult to do. but that's something that they are able to do and will start expanding more. You kind of have to be really specific with the populations that are going to be interested in doing that. But we were at a CDBG meeting last week talking about, like, I would love to see known as village, where, you know, all the grandmothers who've been priced out because they're on fixed incomes, and as rent goes up, they can't afford to live, maybe finding roommate situations for people in affinity groups that may be willing to share, be roommates with each other, and maybe be able to facilitate through the Norman Housing Authority to do that. So we have the ability to do that, but at this point, it's really difficult to ask people, so you have a serious mental illness, would you like to share housing with somebody? And the answer to that is almost always no. So people who have really high barriers, people who are chronically homeless, very rarely, never, have we had somebody in our community who has been willing to enter into a shared housing agreement in order to become housed. And that's just one of the barriers. So that is underway. It works a lot better in major metropolitan areas like Los Angeles, where you have 30,000 people who you can put in a pool and try to match. So some of it is a numbers game. We just don't have enough people in the pool to try to match for that. But it is something that we are looking at going forward. 2.1, increase low barrier housing focus shelter. Medium term, 2.1A, establish at least one permanent year-round low barrier housing focus shelter with day and night services. A friend's house, obviously, is part of that. It's night only. Hub 107 and food and shelter are day only. I'm not going to go into it because everybody sitting at this table is familiar with how difficult that is in our community, and it's got lots of moving parts and lots of difficult things, but it would be incredibly helpful to our community if we had a 24-hour shelter.
Yeah, I'll just briefly speak, and I don't know if anybody else wants to talk, but it's been something that council has been talking about, since I started on council about 2.5 years ago, and I think it's going to be a continued conversation, and it predates me being on council, and it will, happen after I'm off council. But I've heard Councilmember Holman talk about this many times and say we are, as a city, looking at every possible option to find land or places. So if anybody in the community knows of and has identified something, a vacant lot that might be for sale, we are willing to explore every single option to find a location that will be suitable for not only a night shelter but also a day center that's 24 hours and that has those things like case management and wraparound services and places where we can offer kind of the services around getting IDs and like all of that could live in one place, and that is still the identified goal. And it has been, I think a lot of the conversations that we've had show how difficult and challenging that has been for our community to find that location. But always open to suggestions for that. I don't know if anybody else has any other comments, but before we move too far off of that.
I will say, if you want a solution to chronic homelessness, that has got to be part of the answer. Because if you're chronically homeless and you're staying at a night shelter, you just want to come in and you just want to lay down. To ask somebody who has found a safe place for possibly the first time that day and is warm to say, would you like to fill out an hour's worth of paperwork, is not usually feasible. You're going to have some people who are interested, but when you're in survival and crisis mode and you just want to have someplace safe to be able to close your eyes, that's what night shelter is. Day shelter and services is where people are able to do those things and find those strategies that allow them to move from being chronically homeless to being stably housed.
Appreciate that.
All right. 2.2C. 2.2 is expand street and encampment outreach, including treatment for mental health and substance use disorders. Expand capacity and support of existing outreach teams. So currently there are 3 agencies that have outreach teams: Food and Shelter, Caravans, and COCMHC has a housing outreach person. If somebody contacts the cities, specifically through the Action Center, That is emailed out to a whole group of people. One of them is Kara from COCMHC. So if somebody says, this happened, there's a homeless person here, there's an encampment here, then that's going out to all those people. And then Kara usually within a day or two will get out there and try to outreach to them. I will say, people have the right to be out on the street. People have the constitutional right to be out in the street and homeless, even if people don't like it. There are a lot of people, I've seen some of the emails y'all get, I don't envy you at all, but if somebody decides they want to be out on the street panhandling, that is their, Supreme Court has said, that is their constitutional right to do so. So we can go and offer them resources, but that's all you can do is say, there are resources, would you be interested in participating in those? And if they say no, then outreach just has to say, okay, we'll come ask again.
Can you, and maybe you don't know this answer, but we could get this. What does that look like when someone goes out to do outreach services? Like, what types of things are they asking or asking to provide or help with? Like, what does that conversation look like?
It's gonna vary depending on the individual. I will say, Kara, I'm more familiar with the outreach that Kara does simply because I'm more familiar with Kara. But she's just, part of that is developing relationship, getting somebody to trust you. And it may take 4 or 5 or 25 times going out and outreaching to the same person and taking them a meal or doing that. You know, Caravans is developing relationships with people in order to gain the trust that needs to happen for somebody to be, who has been long-term homeless or chronically homeless, to believe that the system is gonna work for them. Because most people who are chronically homeless, the system has not worked for them. And for them to believe that the effort that they have to output is going to have an outcome that's desirable, there has to be a level of trust there. And that's just built slowly.
Yeah, so it's looking like, hey, did you know that there is a night shelter, and is that someplace that you would be interested in going? So like having some of those questions,
Right.
or, you know, I guess previous to what you were saying too about like barriers, like, you know, do you need an ID? How can we help you with these things? Like what caused this, or how do we help fix some and fill some of those gaps?
Yeah.
Okay, Councilmember Grant.
I'm just curious because I had a soon-to-be downtown business owner reach out and ask what is a compassionate way to deal with somebody who is sleeping on the steps, and this particular business has construction happening, so obviously can't stay there. I suggested street outreach, but I was kind of curious. So if you're a business owner, you could call Food and Shelter Caravans or COCMHC.
The best thing they can do is contact the city, so that through the action line.
Okay.
So that, first of all, there's a record of that. And so we can see how often that's happening, and then that way
get directed to.
it can be directed to the right place. Because if you do that, then they're gonna call all 4 of those places or all 3 of those places, and then all of a sudden somebody's being harassed.
Well, I asked Caravans a little bit about it because I also saw it as a conversation between the street outreach and the business as well. So street outreach, at least Caravans has said, like, it would be good if they got a name, could find out a little bit about the individual, kind of if this person's going to be around a bit, then be like, oh, call us if they're having a really bad day, like to kind of intervene. And because, again, like you said, it takes multiple touches to build trust. And so that was what Caravan said, but good to know the action line. Also, that would help with keeping track statistically. So.
Councilmember Montoya.
So this might be a difficult question to answer. So, of the chronically homeless, what percentage would you think would actually utilize day services?
It depends on what services are available.
Okay. Like, let's say those who they need in order to get a job. You have to have a driver's license and some basic documents. So what about services for just getting the documents in place to start getting them on the path of, getting a job, getting into housing, so, and then in my world of accounting, I don't, I'm not in that world, so, I mean, pardon my ignorance, but I don't know what all the services are.
Right. I'm also in accounting, so I do not do case management. So I understand where you're coming from, and I would love to give you statistics. It is so individualized that it's not. So let me give you an example. So we are talking about the PIT count. For those of you who don't know, it's the point in time count. So HUD says in the last 10 days of January, you have to count all the sheltered and unsheltered homeless people in your community if you want to receive federal funds. So we're talking about the questionnaire that we're going to use for the count that's on January 25th. And we try to keep it concise because we want to keep it to 2 to 3 minutes because we don't want people to feel harassed. And just adding one question can change how long that's going to take. So I had opened it up to COC partners and I said, do you have any ideas? Like, this is the survey from last year. Let's talk about, do we want to make any changes? And Karen Canavan, God love her, sent me back like 30 questions she'd like to add to the PIT count. And I'm like, oh my gosh, no. Those are questions that, yes, we would love to have the answer. I would love to know what your barriers are. I would love to know all those things. But outside of a case management appointment with somebody who can develop a rapport and figure out how that works, that's not data that's really going to do us any good because most people aren't going to want to answer it. They're going to get to about question 10 and be all like, done. The other thing, this is what I know about homelessness in the almost 18 months I've been doing this. The Strong Towns guy, can't remember his name, but Chuck Marone. He said something about streets was problems have solutions, predicaments have management. Homelessness is not a problem with a solution. There is not a one thing fix all. There is not any one, even if you gave me $1 billion, I couldn't solve homelessness because I don't have the infrastructure needed nor the housing units to spend it. And once I did that one time, the problems would change. So it's a matter of having every resource, enough of those resources, and being innovative with those resources and constantly looking at your system to make sure you're adding resources that can be added before you're going to be able to solve that problem in a regular and predictable way. It's something that just has to be managed. And you manage it by every solution you can think of, every innovation you can think of. But it's not manageable right now because we don't even have enough resources. We're not even close to having the resources we need to manage the homeless populations nationally. So at the day of the PIT count, I could give you like a better percentage, but that is just like a balance sheet for an accounting audit is good for June 30th. That is good for that day. And we're 10 months out from that. So how the population changes in 10 months without somebody, even in places like Los Angeles where you're dealing with huge populations and you have people that just take statistics for a living, it is such a constantly changing. Not even that didn't even start to talk about transients. People who move between here and Oklahoma City so there's just so many facets to it that it's really hard to say this is the number. I can give you a best close, but yeah.
Along that same kind of question though, like as an example, the Central Library, right?
Going to be a
Gets
huge
used
issue.
gets used as a day shelter. If there was an actual day shelter, I would wonder how many folks that use the library are actually using the library because they want to use the library, or they're just hanging out there because they don't have anywhere else to go. And if we had an actual shelter, how many of them would stay there during the day instead of the library? And I don't know.
yeah.
That's kind of what I think. Part of what
Yeah.
that question is.
I
How many
think-
would accept it, or
Yeah.
you know.
I think like anything, you're going to have some people that are definitely going to move over where there's more resources. They're going to want to be more social than maybe you're able to be at the library, so they would definitely be more comfortable at a day center. Then you're going to have people who, as soon as more people move out of the library, they're going to say, oh, the library's a lot quieter now. This is also a place, it's a free public space with a usable bathroom. There are always going to be people that are going to want to use that resource, because that is a very, think about it. I have the right to go to the bathroom anytime I want at my house or at my work. To have to think and plan about where I'm going to be able to use the restroom is a huge barrier to just coping in life. So anytime you have that as a resource, you're always going to have people that are going to use one or the other. I think it will probably even itself out a little bit, but I don't see any place where it becomes feasible where we say there are not going to be people who are experiencing homelessness that aren't using the public library. Mostly because in our society, that's one of the functions of public libraries. It has become one of the functions of public libraries. Because in any city that there's a public library, I would bet there's probably some places in rural Oklahoma that they might not be able to be at a library, but in most major metropolitan areas, that's a place where someone who's experiencing homelessness would know that's a resource they can use.
Councilmember Ball?
And April probably can answer this better. How many of your clients, because what you guys do, you have all the services of the day shelter and more. Well, y'all are amazing. But so I would see more of your clients going and utilizing a day shelter. Do you think most of them would be open to that?
So we actually are a day shelter. So our facility opens at, right now, about 6 a.m., closes at 4. We're open, we've actually funded staffing to be open for the weekends as well, since the library's been closed. We're paying for that ourselves. And people stay, like you can be there at 3:30 and it's still a full room, but people leave and a lot of them go to the library because that's what they want to do. Or a lot of them leave and go back downtown, kind of just to sit where they're gonna sleep at the night. So it's exactly like Heidi said, it's every person is making their choices for different motivations.
Right. But the new day shelter we're talking about would replace, it'd be an extension of.
Yeah, I think it would
So
be.
most of those people that are there during the day would be utilizing the new day shelter.
I would think so, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Councilmember Grant?
I was jumping ahead a little bit, but whenever we get to 2.2b,
Okay.
I don't have an update for that because as far as I know, there's no money for that.
is Anthony here?
Put down on
No, Anthony Prin.
parenting.
Yes. I was gonna talk some more about that mobile outreach van because you were working on 2 RFPs last we talked.
Yeah, so that is in process.
Would it be how far are you on the one that could be for mobile health or unarmed mobile crisis response? Because I've since talked to some others about that, and I do see the value in having transportation with case management, of course, on board. But when we look at some of the people who are wandering through Norman, they're either released from Griffin or CCDC. I spoke with our municipal court, Rhonda and Jeannie, about it, and they were telling me that basically between the hours of like 5 to 7, it would be really helpful if there was a transport, because you can look at SAMHSA's recommendations for people who are leaving prison, especially those with mental health issues, and it's a warm handoff. And people getting connected to, emergency housing, which would be a friend's house, instead of getting caught up along the way, like at OnQ, and falling into like public intox or behavioral health issues and going right back to jail. So I had a change of some thoughts around that second one, and I was curious also since we talked about this last time with him, if you all are still on the mobile health crisis response or want to revisit that with a different kind of I think what Norman Caravans was saying was like a $1 million a year, possibly more, but a dedicated one, a different type of, I think they called it Mercury Sprinter van, with a paramedic and a mental health professional to respond to those particular situations. But this 8-passenger seat one probably would be better, and it would still be addressing mental health in the scenario presented with at least doing a jail transport, but also being the warm handoff maybe at Griffin or Norman Regional, That's where my thoughts were, but
Yeah, and so I think that's something that we can easily talk about. So, and what I mentioned at that last meeting was, I think part of the goal here is to kind of bring you, and I'm not gonna, the goal is not to bring you a completed RFP, and then, that's what it's gonna be. It's more of a list of potential options, how those would work. That way you can get an idea of like what different options that the city can pursue, and that way you can make a better decision on which of these fits your goals and stuff like that. And I think just adding something like that to the list would be perfect. And again, I don't see those as being mutually exclusive. I think you could maybe have both at the same time if you're going to, meet different needs. I mean, that doesn't mean you can only meet one at a time. So,
Okay.
again, I think that could be something else that we could do, or that could also be included in that presentation. Yeah.
okay, I just wanted to get it out there because I had been thinking about it and talking about it with different community members.
Do we have an estimated timeline on when those RFPs might be ready to launch?
Not at this time, no. We're still in the early stages.
Okay.
But I mean, I am currently in talks with, I think part, even just looking at kind of understanding like what's currently being offered at Norman. I think part of that is going to have to be identifying the gap, right? I think again, you don't want to, this thing that's repeated often, right? You don't want to duplicate services. And I think that's part of it. I don't want to put it on RFP that is duplicating services. And synergizes with all the other COC members who might be offering similar things, and making sure that those work together. I think that's important. So those require a lot of communication with all of our different partners that we have here in the city, and making sure that those gaps are filled. I think is the important part.
Is the first van that we were talking about with like the litter pickup crew, is that on a different timeline?
Sorry, that one, for that particular one, I believe, that RFP's already been posted and
Okay,
published.
great.
And I think we will probably get responses, if I remember correctly, from you. That's kind of when Michelle have that, but that will be, I think, at the end of the year, around the beginning of the year is when we get responses back.
Okay.
And then there will be something that will make council within the first several months next year.
Okay, glad to see that one moving forward and still a work in progress on the other one. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Coleman.
I was going to mention too, I think when we went to the announcement about New Red Rock, that the crisis response, mobile crisis response was one of the points that they put up on the screen, that they were one of the services that they were going to be offering. I don't know how comprehensive that is or what it would actually do.
That's, okay, I'm gonna preface with, I was not at that presentation. If I were gonna have to make a best guess, I would say that's probably an extension of 988 services. Because 988 went into effect, but we don't actually have a mobile crisis center that 988 can dispatch in our community. So people are dispatching from Oklahoma City, so that can add hours on to that. So I think I vaguely remember that part of the commitment for the behavioral health centers is to have seats, not beds, which are 23-hour crisis places for people to come, and the ability to dispatch 988 from within community places. So I know that is one of the things that if 988 were functioning like they would prefer it to be functioning, then there would be mobile crisis response out of Norman to reach this area and some of the places rurally located to us, so it's not a 3 or 4 hour dispatch.
That is what most of us, if not all of us on council, that was our expectation of 988 was in 2020 we allocated funding for mobile crisis response from the police department budget, and then we put that on hold because we were told 988 is going to come online and that's going to address that situation, so we don't need to provide a local mobile crisis response. But that hasn't been the case. So like in my mind, I was thinking with 988, a business owner that's having a problem with someone, they could call 988 instead of 911, and this mobile crisis response team comes out instead of the police. And if it gets escalated to it, the police could end up having to come. But that this team has the skills and the tools where they can more adequately deal with the situation than the police can. And that free up the police to do their jobs elsewhere and better address those issues, but that's not,
Yeah.
because we don't have a,
As
Center
with
here.
all things by government, it is a work in progress.
yeah, sure,
And it will get better, but it will not start great.
yeah. So from what you understand though, 988, that is a goal.
We
would have a local response.
theoretically, that is functionality of 988.
Yeah, okay.
Realistically, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, expecting a resident that calls to like wait there with the person that they're calling about, or like, can you
Yeah.
wait for an hour for one of our people
Yeah.
to show up? If they feel in danger, they're not going to do that. Obviously, they're going to call the police. And
Right.
the police will do what they can, but as you mentioned, sometimes the police can't do anything because it's not illegal for
And-
them to be on the sidewalk. Or,
And in everything, there's this myth that there's some kind of emergency housing dollars out of there, and somebody's just one day going to go like, today's the day I'm going to be housed. And there's a magical apartment and magical rent money that just exists somewhere that we're going to pluck out of the air and house that person. That does not exist. Even Thunderbird Clubhouse, we have a system. It takes us 6 to 8 weeks to move people through our system, all the paperwork, all the inspections, everything. And that's moving fast. So this idea that emergency housing is anything beyond emergency shelter, the only thing that 988 or the police department or anybody else can do is take them to an emergency shelter. And if they choose not to stay there, they're going to be right back where they were.
and I think what we've seen in most cases, if they get taken to jail, they're going to be right back out where they came
Correct.
from.
Correct.
Even in cases where they may have even committed an actual crime, it seems that they're getting right back out.
I cannot comment on that because I don't know.
Madam Chair, to Councilmember Holman's point, in looking at the evolution of 988, we anticipate the ability to occupy the new Emergency Operations Center, which will house the new dispatch, in July of '24. And we're going to go from 5 dispatch center stations to 16. And the ability for us, once we turn on the lights and make sure the phone rings, to make the approach and bring a 988 dispatcher into our shop, to sit next to 911 dispatch and be able to seamlessly hand off calls depending on the nature and the triage. It is an evolution, and resources are, scheduled to come on board that we think do make that even more successful. A handoff from Oklahoma City, right now maybe all we've got, but we do think the level of service will improve dramatically if we can talk them into housing one of their dispatchers to sit right next to 911.
Okay, moving forward.
All right. 2.3, expand supportive services and housing-focused case management. Short-term, 2.3A, provide ongoing training and education opportunities for case managers. We do a usually monthly, everybody's invited. It's open. We have our coordinated case management that happens on Tuesdays. That is a closed meeting. It is only for case managers. It happens via Zoom. The last Tuesday of the month, we have an open meeting where we talk about resources and training. It is specifically for case managers, but anybody in the public is open to come. It is usually at the Well. It is the last Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. That's on our website if you have questions. So we're providing usually 7 to 8 training opportunities per month for that. And then we have also instituted a annual all-day case manager training where we come in and as a COC talk about how can we provide stable, what does our stability plans look like? How can we make sure we're all kind of on the same page? And we will provide other training and resources at that time. So that is well underway. 2.4, improve transportation to employment services and shelter. Work with healthcare providers to enable transportation to and from medical appointments. So Caravans does that, Embark, and the new on-demand transportation system. So baby steps, working towards it. 3.1A, provide regular training for all stakeholder partners in problem-solving techniques, motivational interviewing, and include staff from all access and outreach points. Once again, that's one of the things that we address in our case management training annually. That's also one of the things that HUD tells us we need to train on. So there's a whole list that HUD says, You have to provide these trainings annually, and those are happening either at the full day case manager training or in our monthly sessions. 3.2, develop resource materials and educational information. We have a new it's not new anymore, but we have a COC website. And the best resources in our community, if you need to tell somebody what our resources are, McFarland's list is the best updated resource list. It is online, they keep it updated regularly. Best place to go. Not only do they have the like list that you can print out, but they have like one that's got a groovy map that shows like, this is food, this is this, this is this, this is how far you are from that, this is how you get there. So that's the best resource we have right now. And the links to that are on the COC website. Okay, 3.4, improve communication, coordination, and transparency of the COC. Create a new and accessible COC website. Done. Keep moving. Strategy 3.5, commit to robust data collection. 3.5B, revitalize the COC's data committee with a clear mandate. We have done that. That is still a work in progress. It will happen more and more as the COC is developing rubrics for how we do funding and how we audit files and do more, just making sure that if we tell HUD we're doing it, we're doing it. So that is underway, and we have quarterly data and committee meetings, but reporting is due monthly to the COC. All right. Sorry, that is all the updates I have. The only other thing I would like to mention is, from a data standpoint, the best thing that I can offer you is I can tell you what the summaries from our by name list look like. We're just now getting to the point where we're getting more consistent data with that. At the last COC training, we decided we were going to reorganize the way that our by name list works. I see a lot of blank stares. A by name list. So we keep track by name of the people in our community that we are aware of that are experiencing homelessness. At that training, we decided to divide our list into several sub-lists. So we have a list that's just veterans. We have a list that's families. We have a list that's outreach, which are those in our community who are not actively involved in case management, but have had a VI SPDAT, which is a vulnerability index. It's a tool. It's an assessment tool done, but they're not actively engaged in case management. That is a work in progress. Then we have individuals who are receiving case management. That is the largest portion of the list, and when most people think of a by name list, that's what that is. Then we also have systems of care, because HUD says if you are in an emergency shelter, if you were homeless before you went into hospitalization or treatment or incarceration, and you come out of that and are still homeless, then you are considered in a system of care. So we have an actual list that shows people in our community that are in long-term emergency shelter because they are not considered housed by HUD. They are still considered homeless. So our list, on 6/20 after our training, when we organized it the first time, it was about 89. As of this week, on Tuesday, we went over the list, and it is 167. It is always in flux between really 150 and 175, 185, and a lot of that has to do with people who fall off the list. They're inactive. If you're in case management, at about 70 days, if you have not had contact with anyone, we're going to inactivate you because this is a fairly transient population. They can get back on the list as soon as they come in and re-engage in services. The outreach list is 30 days. If no one has seen you in outreach in 30 days, then you're going to fall off the outreach list. And that's more to keep the list manageable. So we have data. We're getting better metrics. We have at least some measurability. We'll see how that compares to our point in time count, but they're pretty copacetic. We haven't seen huge jumps except for the big jump between 99 and 150 was accounting for people who were on emergency shelter or systems of care and getting that list really accurate. So like our systems of care number for this week is 51. So other than we have weeks when it goes way up, because if we have a week when we skip because we did resource meeting, we might have 20 to 30 people come onto the list. And then as people are housed or inactivated or for whatever reason are moved into a systems of care situation, an emergency shelter, that does not include a friend's house. I'm talking long-term emergency shelter. So it has to be somewhere where we would almost consider them housed, but they're not housed. They have a place that they are staying on a regular basis, but it is considered emergency shelter due to its funding. So that is something that I am working towards being able to list that on our website so that there's some good data-driven information that you can point people in the community to say, this is the summary of where we are today. The pit count information from last year is on the website if anybody is interested in that. And it also has a summary page with it that much more details the information. When Lisa and I were having a conversation about presenting information today, she was like, so this is what this means. I was like, yes, with this caveat. Yes, with this caveat. Yes, with this very explicit definition of what HUD says homelessness is, they fit within this category. How many people are unsheltered, homeless, who don't have a VI that we would consider outreach? I don't know, because I've never seen their name. I could guess. I don't even think that'd be a real educated guess. But there is always going to be a segment of the population of people experiencing homelessness who are not engaging in services, who are literally street homeless, living in encampments, that you're never going to see them statistically. Because the only way I get somebody onto my list is if they have an assessment done through a VI SPDAT. So.
Did you have a question?
Just super quick, Thunderbird, do you still partnering with businesses for the work experience program?
Yes, but that is a specific Thunderbird program with our transitional employment. Yes.
I know, that's why I would ask why you
Yeah.
was up here. How many businesses, is it just one still that's currently doing that?
No, we
or
currently
you all expanded?
have 7 transitional employment opportunities
That's
with
amazing.
5 employers.
Okay, okay,
yeah,
perfect. So
no.
are you still looking for more?
Oh, we are always looking for transitional employment.
So you hear
We are.
that, Norman
You
business
know,
community.
you have a
So-
business, you come see me.
Perfect. All right. That's all.
Councilmember Holman.
So, data-wise, are you able to tell, or would you be able to tell, like, who is here because, who's in Norman because they were brought to Griffin for services, or because they were arrested and ended up in Cleveland County Jail, or because they grew up in Norman and this is what happened to them? Because we hear lots of stories
Right.
about where people come
Lots of
from.
anecdotal stories about people bussing people
Which
in
I've
from
never seen.
homelessness.
Even a single piece of evidence to prove, actually, but
I found the first piece of evidence this week. Somebody from Moore did tell me that, yeah, we have a church that, they'll just come give them a meal and then they'll bus them to Oklahoma City or Norman. I was like, oh, great, let's figure out how not to do that anymore. But that is literally the first instance of a time when I found out that was happening.
More police department does it every week.
Yeah.
okay.
So the best way I can tell you is the pit count. We ask, we've revised our question, so this year we'll be asking it this way. What was the zip code of your residence the last time you were housed? But anything deeper than that, that was one of the things that Karen Canavan in her list of 30 questions is like, what about this? And what about this? That is really a case management, and because that's not part of the uniform questions that we have, then there's no real way to gain that data. Other than saying, anecdotally, we hear that it happens, and the Moore Police Department may have confessed to me that they did that through another entity, not them, but that they had
I've
somebody
heard
in their
of-
community that was doing it.
I've heard of police departments dropping people off in Norman. I've never seen any evidence of a busload of people being brought to Norman from anywhere.
Yeah.
Okay,
Here's what I can tell you about that. There is no entity that I know of that deals with people experiencing homelessness that ethically would consider that an acceptable way of helping someone. So no one in the COC that I know of, if I heard a COC partner was doing that, I would be in their office explaining to them that is not okay. The only time that happens is sometimes when we have a big snowstorm coming. If we know that there are beds available in Oklahoma City and we don't have any here, there might be some transportation specifically on nights when it's going to snow.
you would coordinate with those
That would be a
services.
coordinated
You wouldn't just
effort.
show up at their doorstep
We would
and be
not.
like, see ya.
We do not we discourage highly dropping people off at a place where you don't know that the resource exists.
And you can't force anybody to get on in a
Correct.
vehicle and
Correct.
move them somewhere against the road.
Correct.
Right? Okay. In your experience, why would somebody come to Norman if they were experiencing homelessness?
I don't.
You mentioned that we're vastly deficient in services.
Well, but as vastly deficient as we are still one of the most, the social service community in Norman is known within our state as being robust and collaborative. That being said, I am not personally aware of anybody who's like, you know where it's a good place to be homeless? Norman, America.
Yeah.
Because if you're in Oklahoma City, there's a bus, there's more resources, there's more shelters, there's more everything like that.
I'm sure.
I mean, and I can't imagine somebody being like, you know what would be a good place to be homeless? Lawton. You know, I mean, the rural areas that have absolutely no resources, besides churches that are collaborating together to work, that don't have shelters of any kind. So, I mean.
I've read about Shawnee
Yeah,
not
Shawnee.
having a shelter, but having a real serious issue.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of anyone that's, it takes a lot. It takes a whole lot to move from one place to the other. To move to some place that you don't know has resources, for sure, that you're able to utilize. The fact that somebody's like, well, it's Thursday, I think I'm just gonna uproot my whole life on a bus and go to Norman, see if it's working there. I would assume that they would need to know somebody here or have a contact here of someone who they think might be able to help them. So this idea that, you know, somebody's putting 85 people on a bus, and the only place I know of that's happening is Joe's Addiction is a soup kitchen in Oklahoma City, and they have a bus route that runs in front of them, and people get on the bus at the shelter in Oklahoma City, the night shelter, and they ride the public transportation to Joe's Addiction because they know they can get food and stuff there. And I just happen to know that because I'm associated with Joe's. So, and then they get back on the bus and they go back to the shelter at night. But it's just because that is a resource that they are aware of, that they have transportation to.
In your experience, if we were to close a friend's house and not provide any alternative, you think that would be helpful or make the problem worse?
In my estimation, one of the most difficult things that happened was we have closed encampments and we relocated homelessness to Main Street in Norman, America. The flip side of that is there is no place else for it. And if you close what resources there are now, this becomes, I would assume, exponentially worse.
Do you think they would just go away or wander off?
They are not going to go. They don't have anywhere to go. There's not. Are they going to walk to Oklahoma City? For what? There's nothing there for them that is not here. I mean,
Closing encampments without an alternative plan for where those people to go is how we end up in this situation.
correct. You made it, not you. The closing of encampments makes what was a slightly invisible situation highly visible. It's not that the numbers have changed. It's not that the situation has changed. It just became incredibly visible. We moved it to Main Street. And I totally understand why we did it. It was the only place. It was the only place that they could rent when they first opened the shelter that the city was running. This is the place where Food and Shelter is able to find a space that they can do it. And I understand NIMBYism, the not in my backyard. Would I be thrilled if a homeless encampment was happening by my house? Probably not. However, it does not solve the problem. To provide less resources will not solve the problem. This is not a problem that is going away. It is not a problem, it is a predicament, and the only thing we can do is manage it. And if you cut off resources, you have cut off your ability to manage it.
Councilmember Grant.
Speaking of resources, because Moore is in the county and Cleveland County Continuum of Care. Are we getting help from Cleveland County? I know there's the Cleveland County Health Department, but then we also have our commissioners, and they decide how funding has. And I'm sure they got ARPA funding, that might address this. Have they awarded it to COC? Is there?
I mean, I can't say no because I mean, like, you guys got $1 million to help build housing from the county, right?
When
So-
was that though?
In December,
Was this
no.
Last year?
December.
okay?
So, but as far as like really heavy county involvement in the COC itself, that is one of my goals. I have personally several goals for the COC. That is one of them. I will tell you that the Moore Police Department reached out last week, and the chief of the Moore Police Department would like to have a conversation. I think that's scheduled for maybe it's either next week or the first of the year. I can't remember at this point. But that is in the works to say, you know, can we get the Moore Police Department to be more involved with the COC? The same is true of the city of Norman. The city of Norman was really, really involved with the COC for a while, and that has kind of ended to an extent. And, you know, I'm constantly looking for avenues. We have, officer is not the right word, but I don't remember his title. Hopkins is his last name, that works a lot with people experiencing homelessness, and he has attended some meetings, and he is helpful, and I can call him. And but we would love to have the City of Norman Police Department even more involved.
Would that also include South OKC because our county goes up that far?
I'm
So, I
gonna
mean-
build that bridge right after I finish the two in front of it.
Well, I do know there was somebody, I remember hearing them speak at one of our public miscellaneous comments, and they had an apartment fire, and I was just thinking, why would you come from South OKC? But then to realize it's a county-wide problem, and what's the only real operating emergency shelter? It's in Norman. So, not saying they're being bussed in, but when you have maybe the only resource available in a geographic region.
I will say that Homeless Alliance expanded their evening shelter by, I want to say 300 beds.
Mayor Holt was very proud of it.
Yeah.
So an
I can
opportunity
thank Dan
to,
Strom from Homeless Alliance for that one.
it's like an opportunity to collaborate for the South OKC population that might come our way. It's like, actually, no, just a little to the north.
I would be surprised if we had very many people coming from South OKC simply because from a transportation standpoint, it's so much easier to get to resources in Oklahoma City than to get to resources here. What do we have, one bus that runs between here and Oklahoma City? I don't know, I've never ridden it.
Yes.
But that kind of resource to have, and there are many, many, many more resources in Oklahoma City than there are here.
Okay, so I think that this was really helpful, really enlightening to see what our goals are. We got to walk through kind of the action items and the steps, to see things that are currently underway, things that are still a work in progress, or things that we need to address moving forward. And I think that it's really important to understand, we talk a lot about, you know, the gaps analysis and what we have here, but to really understand that the continuum of care is a county-wide effort. It's not just the city of Norman, and that the city of Norman is no longer the collaborative applicant that is kind of managing that correspondence between HUD and the funding and how those work, and is not leading the meetings anymore. And I think that so Thunderbird Clubhouse is the collaborative applicant, and that is why you see Heidi in front of us kind of walking through these things and working through. And we really appreciate the work that y'all have done in the last 18 months and taking this load on. And also that there's not one solution, as we've talked about. We have a number of identified options that we need to work towards that is going to help, as you say, manage the predicament that we are in with homelessness. And we are not alone in our community in needing to help and to resource around homelessness. This is a nationwide, and if I would not say a worldwide problem. And we need to continue working towards, you know, ways to mitigate and to manage and to help individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So it's not just the shelter, it's all of these housing options, it's all of the outreach, it is partner agencies working together, collaborating, and we've seen multiple new organizations that have popped up in the last several years to help identify more gaps that we're seeing in services. So I really appreciate us and the kind of robust conversation that we had around this. And I hope that people that are listening and that are here are a little bit more educated and aware of kind of the things that we've been doing, not only as a city, but as a continuum. So any further comments or questions from council and the committee?
Nope. Thank you guys.
Okay, thank you. All right, we will move on to item number 2, which is an emergency shelter update, and I recognize
On
Hazel
89th Street
Dozer.
in Cleveland County. So.
Hello. I've done this several months in a row now. There's not a whole lot of exciting stuff to talk about. It's kind of looking the same every month. We stay full every night. Our men's dorm is full, our women's dorm is full. We're doing our very best to connect people with as many resources and get people housed out of the shelter as much as is possible. However, as you've already talked about tonight, there are just not resources to do that. So those numbers have slowed way down now that all the COVID relief and ARPA funds have and the emergency housing vouchers have dried up. So that's why these numbers are a little bit lower than maybe a few months ago when we were seeing, in the double digits numbers of getting housed. I wanted to just respond. This is not necessary. Just quickly about people who are downtown and some of the conversations we were just having. So I spend a lot of time downtown. All my life is downtown, really. And so I know all those folks that are down there. And I was just sitting here thinking that all of those folks, Russell can tell this is true, were in that campsite behind Food and Shelter last November, December, January. You guys remember when that campsite got real big back there? They were all there because it was like, oh, that's where I can go. And if they have a place to go, they'll go there. And I think creativity is one thing that we're going to have to start talking about, because even if we expand the shelter, it's not going to be big enough. It's not going to have animal capacity. People are going to have to be a place to go. And I think that could have worked in a lot of different ways had we had the support and the infrastructure to keep it safe. And I was the only person back there managing it with caravans. And so anyway, that's who those folks are downtown. They've been in this community a long time. They're not new. They were here a year ago, every single one of them. Were here a year ago, sleeping behind Food and Shelter. Would go back there again if that were an option. I know you guys have a whole nother agenda item after this, so you can pass on me if you need to.
Councilmember Holman.
I've heard it mentioned before, and we've talked about it, but there is an existing program where if someone needed to get back home to where they were from, they can.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do that.
Currently
Did I put that on this
exists,
month?
And it's funded. I don't know if it's even
you
part
have
of
4
Friend's
people.
house, but we've.
It's on the bottom.
It says
of
4, okay. Yeah, so that's something we offer on a very regular basis.
Yeah.
We do that a lot for the folks released from Griffin, that if they come and tell me my house is in Ada or my mom can let me stay there, we'll put them on a bus to get there. Like Heidi said, though, we don't send people to another city to become homeless there unless we know they've been accepted to some type of a program that can benefit them. So this week alone, we've helped 2 or 3 different people get to programs they've been accepted to. One is specifically for trans people. It's in another state. She needs to get there, so that's where she's going to go. So, yeah, we do a lot of that.
Good. And that would be nationwide, pretty much. If somebody needed to get back to New York State or whatever.
So I don't know
We can
if
get help and get them there.
this used to be a program called Traveler's Aid. Traveler's Aid has pretty much withered away as just a nationwide program. This is just funded by Food and Shelter. This is just us.
I remember it coming up, Councilmember Lynn, I think, brought it up a year or 2 ago, and staff explained that we actually already have that program in Norman, funded by Food and Shelter, and that any person in Norman experiencing homelessness that has a home somewhere else they could get back to, we would help them do that.
We've sent people to California. We've sent people back to Mexico. Like, we just get them where their life is.
Can't make them.
No,
But if they want it and need it, we can help them.
sure, yeah.
Councilmember Gray.
I was just curious because I was reading the report. So 2 guests left for treatment for addiction. Was are those like treatment addiction facilities in Norman or
No.
out of Norman?
Yeah, those are inpatient facilities. We don't have an inpatient facility here, so inpatient facilities outside Norman.
And I'm just noticing on this one, but that's not the first time, or is this?
Oh, no, that's a regular thing too, yeah.
And then one guest passed away. Was that at the shelter or on the streets?
He died in the hospital,
Okay.
yeah.
And then I'm seeing 28 of these 93 guests are working or have income. So,
We've just developed a new partnership with Brian Nichols. It's about 6 months old. He is an attorney that helps people with disability applications. He's been wildly successful helping people who really can't get into the workforce, and we have some of those, mostly older folks that have disabilities. But he's been wildly successful in that, and even just today, a guy got his award letter, and his benefits are extraordinary. It's just really exciting that he's never going to be homeless again because of that. That it's a huge difference.
was that disability or veterans benefits?
This one was disability.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess the other question I have is I was getting asked by a constituent, and I know you've answered this before, but just to have it on record again, you guys, whenever people are housed, do follow up 6 months,
Yeah.
a year after. Do you have long-term outcomes, or do you stop at a year?
So our permanent supportive housing program has long-term outcomes because those folks stay longer than a year. But when we rehouse somebody through what's called rapid rehousing dollars, or even just our own resources, we follow up with them for, the ESG program the policy is 6 months, but our relationship that we build with the people we house, whether it's at a friend's house at McCown Village or any of our programs, lasts forever. So those folks know when they leave us that we're family and they can come back if they need us. And one of the ways we're able to keep people housed from entering back into homelessness is when something goes wrong, their landlord will call us, or they'll call us and say something's happening, and we can intervene and help with that risk mitigation that you guys were talking about with the landlords. We can say, hey, we'll fix that window. Please just don't file eviction. And then we try to keep them housed. It's just all about relationship.
Okay, thank you.
I think, and I don't know if others have heard this, but there is a rumor, or I've heard this, that there is no longer security at a friend's house. So can you adjust that and what's going on, or if there's just a miscommunication?
So we ended our contract with the security management company that we were working with, and now all of those security officers are employed by Food and Shelter. So they're all still there. They're still security officers. They're just not employed by that person. They're employed by Food and Shelter. And the reason that happened is having two bosses started to get complicated. And we were starting to see some issues like, well, my boss told me to do this. And I'm like, well, that's not our policy. And so we just made the decision to bring everybody under our employment.
Okay, so you brought that in-house,
Yes.
essentially.
Yeah,
Okay, so still security,
All
on
there.
site, every single night.
all there.
Okay.
Nothing's changed except for who employs them.
Perfect, thank you. Councilmember Holman?
And your people with behavioral issues are not allowed to stay there?
Yeah, anybody that's violent or consistently disruptive can't stay there. I know that's not good for Main Street.
Well, that means
because
those
that
people-
have to be outside, but I mean, our first goal, if somebody's having behavioral issues, is to contact mental health. And, I've mentioned it before, we have that iPad, somebody answers that iPad within 5 minutes, they're at a friend's house within 15. They've been really successful at getting people to voluntarily go inpatient, not 100% of the time. Again, I'm just going to keep saying the word relationship because that's the key word tonight, I guess. But our staff are so in relationship with the people that stay there that oftentimes we're more effective at getting people to maintain their behaviors than a police officer would be, or even a mental health professional would be. So luckily, we don't have to do that very often. We don't have to call police for behavioral issues, but we don't allow disruptions.
So most of the calls that you deal with, like emergency service calls to a friend's house, continue to be medical related?
Yeah.
Mostly medical
Yeah.
related, or?
I would say so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Councilmember Buck.
Do you guys have a veterans liaison or somebody that's been trained with the VA to get because 9 veterans I saw, that's crazy. And I know that your numbers don't even include each other, so who knows how many veterans we have in the
Yeah.
continuum of care right now. So I just
So-
wondered, do y'all have somebody that specifically has been trained to?
So when we identify a veteran, our first referral will be to SSVF, which is an outreach program specifically for veterans. We also have a relationship with the VA directly, and they have an outreach person assigned to our area. So we'll connect them with a VA-specific agency, because if you know anything about veteran services, those are very complicated services. A civilian like myself, it's way outside my skill set. So we just connect them with those.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, but all those veterans are engaged.
Yeah. Are there any relationships with the Dale K. Graham Center that's on Lindsay, on West Lindsay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that's
We
what
take
they
people-
do, that
yeah.
case management and kind of get people their benefits that
Yeah.
they might be needing,
Yeah.
and they walk them
We
through
drive people there all the time.
intricacies of that.
Yeah.
Can I just say that veterans are, as a population, there are more resources for veterans
Right.
than any other population out
They're-
there.
And that's why I hate seeing the number
Yeah.
even so
Yeah.
high, because there's so many
If there
things.
is a veteran that is homeless, it's because they are either unwilling or unable to participate in the VA system. There are hotel vouchers, there are housing vouchers, there are units.
Yeah.
Maybe not in Los Angeles, because they've got a way higher number, but in Norman, Oklahoma, if you're a veteran, you can be housed if you are willing to participate in the way that the program works. That is very difficult.
For some
But-
people with
yeah.
mental illness, there's a lot of
Yeah.
mental illness.
And
There's
there
a
are
lot of
people-
PTSD. Yeah.
There are a couple veterans who have been in our community for a really long time, and they participate in the system and get housed, and then crisis or whatever happens, and they become unhoused. So I will tell you, that's not a resource issue.
Right, no, I know, that's why. Getting the people there and
Yeah.
convincing them to use it.
But we do, yeah. Caravans, food and shelter, we're driving people to Dale Graham all the time.
Councilmember Grant.
I guess the term I'm thinking of is in relation to veterans is like that coaching into care model. Does the VA attempt to do that with their person, or is that person just doing paperwork to get them benefits?
I think, so it's two things. The VA themselves don't really process benefit applications, at least that I'm seeing. What Lori Logan does when she comes is process HUD-VASH eligibility, which is basically a Section 8 voucher, but specifically for veterans, and it is a little bit more flexible. So they're looking at connecting to housing resources. But Dale Graham, that's where they'll go and they can do the application for benefits and help them get their DD 214 or is that the right word? All those things, yeah.
Councilmember Howard.
Is there a percent that you might even be able to assign to the number of the Norman population? Those that, because I would say most of the folks I see do not appear to be folks, even if we had the housing and we had the voucher and everything, they would not be able to maintain that on their own.
Yeah, the population we're all mostly concerned
Like, if we
about,
put $2 million
that
towards
everybody's
it.
mad about, everybody's concerned about, whatever your feelings are, really need permanent supportive housing. They need a place to live with wraparound services and intensive case management. Our permanent supportive housing program, that case manager sees that person 3 or 4 or 5 times a week. Like, we're with them because their illness is so severe, because they're gonna bust holes in the walls of apartments, because they don't know how to live inside, because a lot of them haven't been inside for a very long time. And so that's really, and that's the housing piece that Heidi mentioned that Food and Shelter's really interested in. And we've been treading water because we were hoping that Griffin land deal would come through and we could just expand out where we are. I don't know where that's at, but we've just recently made a decision to just start acquiring existing property that can be used as housing, and then we put people in and wrap around services around them, and apartment, like 1-bedroom apartments or something like that, similarly to our Tuscany Court project, because that's what we need in Norman for that population. Again, I just kind of remind people all the time, homelessness is a spectrum. Most people who are homeless become homeless for a situation, get in and out of homelessness very fast. They rarely need resources. They self-resolve very fast. It's, I got a divorce, my wife kicked me out, I need a couple of weeks, they get back into their place. So that's most people, and that's who we're helping a lot too. It's this small group of people, the chronically homeless population that are the downtown alleys, campsites, and those are the ones that take a lot of resources and need that permanent supportive housing piece.
Any other questions for April? Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will move on to our final item, which is an update on a prior discussion regarding interior improvements to 109 West Gray Street. Yes. You're up.
I told you you were gonna be here. I got my numbers and I was working to have something on paper for you to look at. Yesterday afternoon and all day today I was out of my office, but I have my numbers in my head so I can kind of relate everything to you. 209, which is the building we're first looking at, was the one that had asbestos in it. So we got worried that was going to be too expensive for us to mitigate and then do the renovation. So we're looking at the building right next to it, 213. As I've got my numbers in from contractors for the demo work, it's come out that actually 209 remains to be the cheaper option if we decide to go that way. We were looking at a $40,000 demo prior to finding the asbestos. Full demo with asbestos removal only bumped us up to $60,000, which was about half of what we thought. We really thought we were looking over 100,000 or 20,000. It came in really good. The building next to it is built into 2 stories, has a lot of jagged areas. Demo on it alone was 60,000. So I think that where I really put my focus back onto, I did get numbers for both buildings, but I put my focus back into 209, which is the Far East building. To complete demo, renovate that area into up to, I think we have a design with a little less, but it could house up to 100 beds at a 70-30% ratio or whatever deemed that they need on the male to female. Be two bathrooms in the women's section with a staff bathroom, 2 bathrooms and a urinal in the men's section. Basically, center area for the observation, storage of materials, things like that. My estimates have come in at $297 with a $20,000 contingency, which might be a little light because it is an old building. Once we get underground on looking at stuff, you might want to jump up to 10,000 more, maybe 307 with that $30,000 contingency. But that would give, basically a complete new interior with a sanded and sealed concrete floor, working, heat and air systems, an area for TV or sitting area. Can't believe how we designed that, but a community area on both sides for the men and the women. Plenty of storage for sheets, towels, things like that for the facility. And I feel like those numbers are pretty strong and pretty good numbers. I looked at all on the solid side of the numbers I got in, and if I had a number that looked a little too light, knowing in my history of construction, that's not going to work. I just bumped it because I wanted to look at the numbers I want to give you are going to, I think, are going to be extremely accurate. There's not going to be a surprise of saying, oh, hey, I need another 100,000. I don't want to do that. That would embarrass me. So I think the numbers we came in are pretty good with the contingency of 20,000 at 297 for a complete remodel of that building.
Councilmember Grant.
Would any of this include showers or any kenneling options?
No, kenneling's way out of the realm for me on that. The rules on that are pretty high. This would just be for housing and overnight stay with no showers. It would just be for bathrooms.
April, can I ask a question? Were you able to find out if that church service with the mobile showers can still connect to a friend's house?
They did come. They did get with Michelle Loudbeck and figured out a process, and they were able to come. So it's been a little cold, so they haven't been the last couple of weeks. But yeah, that's an option.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Coleman.
So if we made these improvements to the building, what do you think as far as the reusability of that building when we don't need it for a shelter anymore?
One, getting rid of the abatement of the asbestos is huge. Those costs are always just going to continue to go up. But you're basically having a shell building with some offices in the center. So the reuse of the building to me would be open for about anything at the end. I mean, you're gonna have, basically sheetrock walls, drop ceiling tile ceilings. It could be remodeled very easily for, add whatever. You've already got your bases of your sheetrock around the edge. So the reusability, for the city, I think the money it's there. It's
You
very
think-
easily done.
These improvements would make it more attractive for us to sell it at some point, if we
Oh, yes,
wanted
sir.
to sell the property?
Yes,
Or
sir.
sell the
Yeah.
buildings?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Councilmember Gray.
Also, this doesn't include couch though? Like we've talked about sprinkling that and,
This will bring the main sprinkler system into just that building with branches ready to go into the adjoining buildings. I think my numbers came in at 49,700 to get the main line into that building and get that sprinkled with two Ys or two Ts coming off that would run back to the west to go into the next buildings.
okay.
Councilmember Holman.
And so currently we're using 109, 110, 111? Those
Yes.
3 buildings?
Yes.
And this proposal would be to consolidate it into 109 only.
Yes.
And the last, I guess, the one drawing, I guess, we sort of saw, the entrance is moved, a new entrance is added onto the east side of the building.
Yes,
That
sir.
faces the parking lot.
Yes. And that would be one entry for the women and one entry for the men, and both would be on the side of the parking lot where there'd be a little easier for them to line up.
And so there would no longer be any access on Gray Street frontage.
Right, that just, the door that would be there would be for emergency exit only.
Madam Chair, and just to put Lance on the spot, in the implementation of what you've identified, can you describe any disruption in service or how we might facilitate that project?
Yes, she has a pretty good plan.
So, if you've been in the shelter, the men's dorm is separated by a storage area that we have kind of a temporary plan for to make that into the women's dorm, because the women are the only group on the 109 side. So the women would move temporarily into that storage area, which would mean we couldn't hold totes and stuff right now, but people are better than totes. And so they would go in there temporarily. Then all the renos would be done at once on 109, and then everybody moves back in at the same time.
So that's the most efficient, it doesn't put anybody outdoors while that work is taking
And it
place.
seals the building off, so there's nobody potentially exposed to asbestos.
Lance, do you mention estimated timeline?
My worst case scenario would probably be a 6-month build out. I think we could do it a lot quicker. The demo's less than a month. The longest part's going to be, cutting up the floor to get our sewer system in. Once that's in, your build back goes very quickly. I mean, you're talking, boxing out the walls in a few offices. I think if we had no hiccups, we could see a 4-month turnaround. Worst case scenario, we get into a sewer issue or a water issue that pushes us back, to 6-month max.
Okay, if we were to do this so right now we have a contract, we're funding 50 roughly beds. If we wanted to expand to 100, we would need to renegotiate what
We would need additional staffing. I mean, the case managers, we would need additional case managers. And I think because we would be reducing, we would no longer need the fire watch position. 3 overnight people would still be sufficient. 2 to station in each dorm, and then 1 that goes back and forth for support. But the case managers, I think we would want to have more of those folks.
Do you think it would double our current contract to double the beds, or not? Doesn't really work out that way.
So the overnight people are the most expensive part.
Sure.
So I think that's where, so we don't take any admin costs for running the shelter. I don't get paid any money for doing it. It's really just the overnight people and then the case managers. That's really the bulk of it. So I don't know if it would double it, because those folks work 3 hours a shift, so.
So, and Councilmember Holman, just because we're talking out loud and kind of thinking about how that might work, it seems like in just the progression of the systems would be set up to expand to the west, that after the initial renovation on the far east side took place, men, women, you could work without any impact on the existing beds in the next space to the west. Sprinkle it, whatever walls are needed to move, and then that space would be available to grow into if that was the direction council chose to move. That's the way it works in my brain, but I would rely on Lance to say that that's how it would work from a construction standpoint, and April would tell you that's how it would work from an operations standpoint.
So this, well, the way I'm understanding it, the 109 remodel, or consolidating everything in 109, could get us 100.
Yes, I think that would be our max bed space that we could get in there.
So we wouldn't be expanding
To the west.
into these other buildings, we would be consolidating, and by doing so, 109 has enough room that it could accommodate that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And you may not need more staffing, you would need more staffing to have 50 more people in there, right?
I think we would want more case managers.
More case managers, yeah. Okay.
So the cost for the fire watch is how much?
The what? The cost for it?
Yes.
So those folks work 5 p.m. to 7 a.m., 7:30 a.m., and they get paid $25 an hour plus taxes and benefits.
So that would be a savings that could be converted to case
Two
management.
case management.
Well, my idea is that I think going from, with 2 overnight security with monitoring 100 people, I think that's probably insufficient. I would think that we wouldn't need to increase overnight staff because one of those people is fire watch. They would just go back to being regular shelter monitor. I do think we would want 3 people overnight.
So you have one fire watch person?
1 fire watch, 2 security officers.
Okay, so the fire watch would move into a security.
Shelter monitor or something like that
Position.
position, to just be because
Okay.
somebody needs to go to the bathroom, we've got to have somebody in that space, or needs to take a break, or there's an incident happening they need to
So
respond
the
to.
expanded cost would really just be those extra.
Those
cases
extra cases.
for those 3 hours.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then maybe linens, I mean, because we are paying for that that's a cost as well, but it's minimal.
Councilman Grant.
This might be complicating things now that we just talked about staffing, but the old senior center, I know I saw the kilns at the so are they all, is it completely empty, and would it be, is it sprinkled, and would it be, or not? No, sprinkled, because that would keep the cost down. To be overflow, like while this construction's happening?
Senior Center, you all just agreed to a contract with Mary Abbott House.
Oh, dang.
Last council meeting.
So,
Occupying
okay.
that space as quickly as they can.
Got it, okay.
For what I understand from Lance, the wall construction is going on and would not affect, we would have space in the other areas.
50?
We could still have 50, yeah.
The only thing I would think of is, like, so would the women move over to the middle area?
They would move to the middle area. That door that's in that storefront would have to be opened up for an exit. So in that storefront window has a door that goes into it that's close to a wall. But when we were talking to the building maintenance people, Greg, is that the tall guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's our chief building official.
Yeah, so he said it would be fairly easy to open that up and have a door access there.
The only caveat I'd say is, like, technically capacity would be determined by the fire marshal. And I don't know if
Oh,
Lance,
yeah.
if you've worked with him,
Yes.
to determine that the capacity would be the same.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
was
my-
in that meeting when we talked about using
Yeah.
that middle space, yeah.
I just, yeah, so.
So council, based on Lance's strategy, if there is consensus to advance
I'm down for
to
it.
such a plan, what we'll do is just make sure, we may need an appropriation. And we'll work with Mr. Francisco tomorrow morning and figure out what action council would need to take to advance that strategy.
Is there any outside funding we might be able to find, grants or anything for that type of?
The Homeless Alliance story, we looked at that with great interest in terms of where their grant funding came from. Family Foundation of Oklahoma City that has provided some funding outside of OKC, especially in this space. Those are angles we'll start working, but my guess is the immediate action, if council wants to move swiftly, it'd be a general fund reserve appropriation.
We do have that 718 funding set aside.
Yeah.
500.
Yeah.
So we have dollars in the bank already appropriated, then it's just a matter of whether or not the any one of the individual trades costs over 50 grand, it would require council action. If it's under 50 grand, that's
We
action.
could probably put together bid packages for some of the trades. Some of it's like the abatement of the asbestos and demo would be under state contractor, so we could probably move forward with that. But everything else, we'd probably put bid packages too, which would add a little bit to the timeline.
And we really do appreciate Lance, because he knows how to do all that stuff for us, and he does it professionally, like building people do.
Why we made the position.
I have a question for Rachel. The 109 address holds 40 people right now.
52.
52?
Well, between, so we use 109, the middle section is 110, that's storage, 113 is the men's dorm. So there's 22 women in 109 currently, and 30 men in 113.
After renovations and capacities increased before the fire marshal standard, right? We still find it sufficient to only secure or monitor the clients for 3 people. We would, increase the number of monitors. I know you're talking about getting case managers, but they'll be inundated and overwhelmed, of course, now, with managing those cases. Do you feel, once the population increases, the client population increases, that those 3 monitors will be sufficient to, I guess, manage the?
My gut says yes, just based on how things are working right now, and so I don't know if we get in there and we're starting to see, oh, it's hard to manage that we don't have a conversation later, but my gut says yes. The staff, when guests are awake, there are currently 3 case managers, 3 security, fireworks / security people, so there's 6 people there while they're awake. The overnight people are there during sleep hours, so
Right.
most
So
people
less
are
activity.
asleep, yeah.
Any other questions? Do you have what you need?
Do we have consensus from the 5 who are here that we're on the right track? We will
Yes.
proceed without objection. Then we shall
Sounds
proceed.
good. Okay.
Thanks, council.
Then
Appreciate you.
that was the last item on our agenda, so this meeting is adjourned.